welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Katie Bloom. I'm a board member with Conservation Minnesota. And I was also asked to share my favorite outdoor place. Mine is the Boundary Waters of Minnesota. That played a big role in my teenage years and early adulthood, going on trips up in the Boundary Waters, and I still just love every bit of it. And when I go there, it brings me home. So that is my favorite outdoor place. I am also the director of Bellwin Conservancy, so I'll talk a little bit more about that as I give my introduction. But for those of you who may not be familiar with Conservation Minnesota, we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to protect the Minnesota you love by solving some of our state's most important environmental problems. And we're committed to protecting people and places from adverse impacts of pollution, climate change, and then also ensuring that everyone who calls Minnesota home has access to the great outdoors and all of the opportunities we all love to enjoy it. So Conservation Minnesota's work is centered around bringing people together across regions, backgrounds, and beliefs to find real solutions. And that's something that I really love about Conservation Minnesota too, is we're very solutions focused. So tonight we'll be talking about critical funding for Minnesota for outdoor projects that comes from lottery sales. These funds have been at work providing clean water, healthy habitat, outdoor recreation, and outdoor education opportunities for over 30 years. And this November, voters will have the opportunity to vote to keep those funds working for our great outdoors. So in my role as director of Bellwin Conservancy, we've actually been the recipient of some funding from this source for two different things. One is for doing some work in land protection. So we do land protection work through conservation easements and also owning different parcels of land. And we sometimes will get funding from the Natural Resources Trust Fund for that work. And it makes the work we do possible too. So just in the past, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, we've been able to protect an additional 60 acres of land because of funding from the source. So that's really fantastic, and all that land is within 20 minutes of the Twin Cities. So it's valuable land both for habitat and also for people's access to the outdoors. The other thing that funding has done for Bellwin in particular is to fund one of our environmental education programs that partners with Anishinaabe Academy, which is a K through 5 Minneapolis public school focused on Dakota and Ojibwe language and culture, and then also the expansion of that program to reach other urban Indigenous communities and schools, and that has been a fantastic project. It's been growing for the last 3 years with this funding, and we just got more funding to continue the growth. So those are just a couple examples that I personally have seen. There are so many examples across the state of this as well. But I will close up my remarks and get to our fantastic speakers that we have tonight. We have some amazing leaders with us that have various levels of experience with this and funding for outdoor projects. So first, though, I want to introduce our moderator for this evening. We have Avery Hildebrand, the Public Land and Outdoor Recreation Program Manager for Conservation Minnesota. He's also working as the Engagement and Coalition Coordinator for Minnesotans for the Great Outdoors, which is the campaign working to ensure passage of the ballot measure to renew lottery funding for outdoor projects. I hear Avery's favorite place in Minnesota is pretty much anywhere along the North Shore where he lives near Duluth. So Avery, why don't you tell us more about who we have here with us tonight?
Excellent. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. So again, yep, we're honored to have some very interesting people here with us tonight to discuss how the Minnesota State Lottery benefits our great outdoors and to highlight how Minnesota voters can ensure that this funding continues for future generations. So first up on our panel, we have Representative Athena Hollins. Representative Hollins was the chief author of the bill that put the constitutional amendment to renew lottery funding for the great outdoors onto the ballot this election. Representative Hollins was first elected in 2021 and has been an environmental champion from day one. And Representative Hollins, thank you so much for being here. I'm just curious to start us off is what's your favorite outdoor place in Minnesota?
Thanks so much for having me. Um, yeah, so I really racked my brain about this because I've been trying to visit every single state park in Minnesota. So I have to say, Gooseberry Falls is a really special place to me, and it has like a important place in my heart. But also, I love our urban wildlife and green space. So I live near Lake Phalen, and being able to access that space on a regular basis and bring my kids to it and take them fishing and canoeing has been also incredibly important to me. So I have two. I refuse to have just one.
I'm in the same boat. It's really hard to choose. Thank you, Athena. Um, and next up with us, we also have Carolina Ortiz. Carolina is the Associate Executive Director of COPAL. COPAL is a member-based organization whose mission is to improve the quality of life for Latina families in Minnesota. And COPAL is a valued partner in the Minnesotans for Our Great Outdoors Coalition, all working together to educate voters about the constitutional amendment to renew lottery funding for the great outdoors. Carolina, welcome and thank you for being here tonight. And what's your favorite outdoor space in Minnesota?
Thank you so much, and it's so great to be here with all of you. My favorite space, so I'm a first-time homeowner, and learning what type of pollinating plants I can plant in my backyard, gardening for the first time with my nephews and nieces, harvesting what we've grown, like, all of that just has been a blessing for me. So I think my backyard is one of my favorite spaces, and sacred spaces right now, but we live in Minnesota, so we are also surrounded by so many beautiful places. So all the ones mentioned already are some of the best ones too.
That's excellent. That's I wrestled with do I just say my own house too? It's love just sitting outside. Thank you. Welcome. And then last but certainly not least, we have Marcus Starr. Marcus is the campaign manager with Minnesotans for Our Great Outdoors, which is the campaign working to pass the constitutional amendment we're going to be discussing tonight. Marcus, what is your favorite outdoor spot?
Thanks, Avery. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcus. Nice to be here this evening. As others have said, it's a very difficult question, given that what Minnesota is our great outdoors is like kind of the thing that brings us all together. But I would definitely say just the trails along the Mississippi River in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I do a lot of running, and just having the ability to connect from anywhere from the capital all the way to like Minnetonka if you wanted to go that far, all on one trail. So we have an incredible system set up that way. So by far, that's that system.
Excellent answer, Marcus. Thanks for being here. And if you don't mind, we're going to start with you, Marcus, just to kind of get us together and understanding what we're talking about tonight. Would you tell us more about just the history of the lottery funds, just kind of essentially how and when was the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund created?
Sure. So it started in the late 80s. The Minnesota voters decided we're going to have a state lottery. And then throughout that process, there ended up being a result where there were some legislators who wanted to make sure that the lottery was being used for certain dedicated reasons. So it ended up being a big advocacy effort to make sure a portion of those funds are actually going to the environment. And what they ended up doing was they created what's called the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. That fund was put on the ballot in front of voters in 1988, and it read basically a question of like, to protect, conserve, preserve our state's air, water, land, parks and trails, and other natural resources, essentially is how it read, or some variation of that. In 1988, then, voters overwhelmingly approved that with over 70% of the vote saying, yes, we want to dedicate this money. So what's happened since then in the last 30 years, 40% of lottery dollars. So think about scratch offs or Powerballs, things you get at gas stations with the lottery. 40% of those portions go to the trust fund. And then from there, each year there's a council called the LCCMR that then kind of takes in project applications from across the state. And that can be from places like city governments, towns, cities, the University of Minnesota, different types of organizations, nonprofits. They do a grant application asking, we want $100,000 to put this bike trail in our city, or we want to research aquatic invasive species. And then the group of the LCCMR members, which are some citizens and a mix of legislators as well, then go through and pick out projects and then recommend those projects to the legislature, where reps like Rep. Hollins can then go ahead and vote yes to approve the projects. So in that time, in the last 30 years, it's been over $1 billion have gone to the outdoors. I think after this last year, we're up to like 1,700 projects across the state. So it's one of those things where, if you've been on a trail, or if you've gone swimming in a lake, or kind of cast your reel on a fishing pier, there's a great chance that you've been a benefit of these funds.
That's good grounding. Thank you, Marcus. Real quick, folks, I do apologize to get us off track here a little bit, but I forgot to mention for our audience members, there is a Q&A option tonight. So if you'd like to submit questions for our panel, we'll make sure to get to that in maybe the last 10 minutes or so. So feel free to do that. Thanks, Marcus. And then that sets us up well for our next question, which is for Representative Hollins. You are one of the legislative members on the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, or the LCCMR, as it's better known, which is the commission that reviews and recommends lottery-funded outdoor projects. And wondering if you could tell us just a bit more about what that commission does and what the project review process is like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is I was carrying the bill for the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund before I was on the LCCMR. So basically, I did a bunch of work on the trust fund bill, and then I said, well, I gotta understand better how this process works and what we're doing it for. And so I asked to be appointed as a legislative member of the LCCMR. And it has been a whirlwind of learning throughout that process. So what I tell folks all the time is you are in really good hands with the LCCMR, because it is such an intensive process, and we have such a diverse body of people who are looking at all of these projects and making decisions on them. So when we first get the host of projects that come in, projects, programs, funding requests, the whole group goes through and identifies they get to rank our top choices. And then from those rankings, we narrow it down to approximately 100 of them that we then sit and listen to their presentations. So we don't just read through the applications. We read through the applications, and then we ask them to come in and do about a 15-minute project presentation for the entire group. So we spend probably 3 full days listening to project presentations. And after we listen to all the project presentations, or during it, we're making notes, we get to ask questions, and then we get to vote on and rank our projects, and also allocate an amount of funding that we think would be acceptable. So sometimes that's fully funding a project, sometimes that's partially funding. We get really in the weeds on it, like, wow, it seems like you've got the first 2/3 of this project really well thought out, but the last third is not, and you're going to need to come back to us and show us the first 2/3 before we give you that last bit of money. So it gets really intensive on how and what we look at, but basically we engage in a lot of discussion with each other, and then we come to this sort of proposal based on the total amount of dollars that we're going to allocate. And when everybody comes to an agreement, we vote on it within the LCCMR, and then it gets made into a bill, which gets sent to the legislature to be voted on by the entire body of the legislature. So it's a very intense process. And as mentioned, the LCCMR is made up of citizen members and legislative members. So while it is political because of the people who are there, it's also really grounded in science and community, because the people who are a part of the LCCMR, who are community members, um, they are usually researchers or people who are deeply invested in the conservation movement or environmental movements. So it has a really good balance of being not just a political playground, but really something that can benefit all Minnesotans across the board.
That's some excellent context. Thank you. And good to hear. Good to hear that it sounds like the money's in really good hands, and definitely doing your due diligence. So appreciate your service on that. And just to stick with you real briefly, Athena. So are we unique in Minnesota with our use of lottery proceeds going to the environment? And have other state legislatures ever asked us about this and want to learn more about maybe them doing the same?
That is a great question. I have to say, I believe we are pretty unique. I haven't had a lot of conversations with other legislatures, but I do know when I talk to folks at conferences, like state legislature conferences, a lot of folks have lottery proceeds going to different issues. Some of them are going towards education, some of them are going towards, just all sorts of different things where they put those extra lottery proceeds. But I do think that to me, it makes a lot of sense, because that's what grounds us in being Minnesotans, is having love for the outdoors and for green spaces, and like a deep respect and understanding and love for that space in which we live in, right? I think I'm not originally from Minnesota. I'm originally from Hawaii. But it's one thing to me that connects Hawaii and Minnesota is like this love of the outdoors, regardless of the weather, regardless of the landscape. We love to be out there and be doing things in it. And so I do think, I don't know for sure that Minnesota is totally unique, but I know that I've had other folks come to me and say, how did you guys get this started? Like, where did this come from and how popular is it? And I get to tell them it's wildly popular. And it started, when I was 5 years old. So that's pretty incredible.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Carolina, we're going to move on to you. I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit more about COPAL and the important work that you and your organization does.
Yes, happy to share more. So, as you mentioned at the beginning, our mission is to improve the quality of lives of Latin American families that call Minnesota home, but also acknowledging that even though our focus is the Latino community, that the work that we do impacts everyone who calls Minnesota home. And part of the work, well, all of the work really started in 2018, so we are still a fairly new organization. And in 2019, we started doing a lot of work with environmental justice, specifically with a connection of internal and external migration and how that plays a role in the environmental justice work done here. And also, about a year and a half ago, we started doing outdoor events, acknowledging that there's so many barriers for community members to enjoy the outdoors. Barriers as much as transportation, just knowledge about what's happening at different parks, different resources or equipment to enjoy things such as snowshoeing, or, it can get very expensive. So we started doing partnerships with our other organizations to have outdoor events every month. So it started off with just a handful of folks. Now we just recently had a farm tour and we had over 70 people show up. So it has been increasingly popular. And it's been an amazing opportunity to also understand how do we build leaders who are already super invested in preserving our outdoor spaces, learning more, being more engaged. So we have been working directly with community members with that, and also again elevating the leadership as people are showing up to these outdoor events. We're also connecting them to the other work that's happening. That's also how we've managed to get more information about what's happening with the lottery authorization this year, getting information to neighbors, friends, family. So it's been a big piece of the work within Copal.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the work that you do. It's certainly important. And also, you did mention that, becoming a little bit more familiar with the lottery funds and how they benefit the outdoors here. Can you just tell us a little bit more about why your organization has endorsed the ballot measure and why you want to see this funding renewed?
Yeah, of course. So when we started our work in 2018, we started with the intention of also acknowledging that um, we wanted to be community led. We wanted to have members that were leading us in the efforts that we did moving forward. And we have been doing that. We actually have a committee of environmental justice community members who meet every month and ask the hard questions, ask what Copal is doing regarding environmental justice, and this was something that was really important to them. We had somebody present to the committee so that they were fully aware of what it was, how Copal could support, and they decided to support it. So we, as an organization, then move forward with endorsing it. So it, again, since the very beginning when we started this work, we wanted to be very intentional about not just having two people within the organization decide, but really having a community that is guiding the work and deciding with us. So that's really what led to us deciding to say, yes, we have to endorse it because our members are pushing for this.
That's great to hear, and it's great to have you as part of the coalition of support. Marcus, I'm going to turn to you briefly. So, Minnesotans for Our Great Outdoors is the campaign entity that was created to help renew the lottery funding this election. And wondering if you can tell us more about what to expect when voters see their ballot on either November 5th during the election at their polling location, or while early voting by mail or in person, which is underway in Minnesota.
Sure. And just because you sort of briefly touched on it, Avery, with Carolina here. So the makeup of the Minnesotans for a Great Outdoors Coalition is a really interesting group of organizations. It consists of groups like traditional conservation groups like Conservation Minnesota, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, but we also have some really cool like business interests that are involved too. So like Hospitality Minnesota, who represents all of the camp resorts and campgrounds, and kind of like they look at the economic angle of this. At the same time, we also have local governments, so like the city of Elk River or Hennepin County. They really support this ballot measure given the kind of funding they can get from it. Then we also have interesting groups like REI and the Craft Brewers Guild of Minnesota because they really support clean water. So it's really an interesting group of 140 organizations that have come together to sort of support this. On the question of what voters will actually see on their ballot, so the questions come in the front side of their ballot, probably on the right column. It might vary based on what county you're into, but it'll be right there on the front side. There'll be a question that will be headlined with the renewal of Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. It'll also give you a little description. That's really important to note that if you leave your ballot blank, it's considered a no vote. Minnesota is a little unique in that scenario where it's just not a vote of who turns out, but if you turn out, you're going to be included sort of in the ballot total. So we're working pretty hard on making sure folks know that blank vote is a no vote. And then they'll actually read you a question about, do you want to continue the renewal of sending lottery dollars to preserve our lakes, rivers, parks and trails, all the sorts of items we've already talked about. So when you get your ballot, if you haven't gotten it yet, or when you go in there on election day, look at the very front. It's nice that it's not on the back of the ballot with all the judges who are running unopposed. We're right there, kind of front and center.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. It's good to know what we'll be seeing when folks head to vote. Also, just want to bounce back a little bit to the legislative process. Representative Hollins, just wondering if you'd be willing to just explain a little bit more about the bipartisan and legislative process that helped move this bill forward and put it on our ballot this election.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say that this has been a really bipartisan effort, and it's been a bipartisan bill in general. And part of the reason for that is because it has such a huge reach outside of the Twin Cities metro area. Like every corner of the state is impacted by these dollars. And so most legislators, regardless of which party they belong to, understand the benefit to their communities, right? Like when we're able to shore up retaining walls on people's favorite trails or do work to clean up lakes that are in their communities, that's work that's being done that is not coming from tax dollars from citizens. So it benefits their communities, and they don't have to do anything, they don't have to tax their citizens anymore, which, most regular people really like too, right? Because they benefit from this. So when we were at the legislature, it did pass on a bipartisan vote. And it's just because of the reasons that I said. But that being said, we also took in a lot of we had long conversations with people on both sides of the aisle, figuring out what they really wanted to see from this and helping them understand how it was going to benefit their communities. So I think it was both something that, if you've been there for a long time, that it's good for your community. And if you're newer and you're not sure what it was, we had long conversations with them to help them understand how this was going to benefit them directly and benefit their people. And I think that really made a big difference on getting the bipartisan vote through.
Yeah, it was great to see. We always like it when folks can find common ground and move things forward. It's definitely popular and on both sides of the aisle. So thank you for that. Carolina, just want to hop to you again and do apologize for bouncing around a bit, but there is another aspect of this that we haven't talked about yet that we're excited about, which is the additional funding that will become available to smaller organizations in Minnesota doing good work at the local level. I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit more about the community grant program that will be created after this amendment is passed by voters this election.
Yeah, so that's something that we're really excited about, because it will be an opportunity for small organizations, community groups to brainstorm and get creative and think outside the box of, what can be done. And then the second piece of the excitement in that is that we will need to have community members to apply to be a part of the advisory committee. So similar to what was mentioned prior, I think it's also an opportunity to think how can we support smaller organizations or groups that don't have, all the entire team to develop a long strategy on their own, but really how do we support and make sure that they are getting the funding necessary in order to do the projects that they have in mind or that they will have in mind. So it is a very exciting moment. I'm also happy to put in the chat the contact of Mike Carley, who has also been leading many initiatives on this. And one of the invitations is always if anybody listening wants to be a part of the efforts, wants to have conversations with community members or help maybe somebody in mind who wants to be a part of that advisory committee, please reach out. We're happy to have a conversation and see how we can support.
Yeah, please do share that. That's an excellent note and a great opportunity to help make sure that these funds are more accessible to more folks who, again, they don't have it's hard to spend time to go out to the legislature and lobby for your project, and it is definitely a barrier to entry. So thanks you for that work. Marcus, I'm going to hop back to you. So that does lead me to wonder what happens if this ballot measure fails? What happens if we don't vote to pass or to continue the lottery funding for our great outdoors?
Yeah, so what would happen, and I think we feel good that it probably won't, but in the event that it did not, uh, the trust fund would still be in existence. That's not going anywhere, but the money would be freed up for the legislature to kind of decide what they want to do with it. It wouldn't be like exactly it's going to go directly to the general fund, but the legislature could say, "Hey, well, we'll put more money back. We'll put this money back in there." But I think we can all make our assumptions of what might happen. I mean, we're talking about upwards of at least $80 million a year that's available. Once that comes into play, it's going to be hard for groups or coalitions to kind of control what happens to it. So it's nice that Minnesota has just a couple dedicated funds that go directly to the environment, and this is one of those. So that's why we're working hard to keep it that way.
Good to know. Marcus, since we have you here, we actually have a question from the audience. It's a good one and somewhat related. I'm often hearing, starting the question, I'm often hearing the argument that this funding renewal will eliminate any legislative oversight. What is your best response or counterpoint to this claim? Which I think maybe Representative Hollins has already touched on a bit, and please do.
I think I'll turn this over to the rep. That's a much better person to talk about that.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So no, this does not reduce any legislative oversight on this funding. If it doesn't go through, so let's see. I had this question from a student actually in Woodbury, and he said, "How will Woodbury residents' lives change if this doesn't pass?" And I said, "It won't change, or if it does pass, it won't change their lives at all because it's been in place for 30 years. What will change is if it doesn't pass, because if it doesn't pass, what you are liable to see is taxes going up, local taxes going up to cover the infrastructure changes and the upkeep that needs to be done in different areas. And what you will also see is probably some schooling being impacted because we do fund a lot of research that happens through the University of Minnesota. So it will have an impact if it does not pass. Now, that being said, the legislative oversight part of this has not changed substantially at all. It is still going to have to go through the LCCMR process, and it's still going to have to go through the legislature for approval and a vote in order to do the regular LCCMR funding. I think that there is maybe some confusion with the small grant program and whether or not that's going to have the same legislative oversight, but I don't think that that's actually a concern. The small grants program is going to be substantially less, like smaller amounts of money that are going through this, and it's also going to go through a similar process to the LCCMR. So there's not going to change legislative oversight of those funds. The biggest difference is if this doesn't pass, those funds will go into the general fund, and then it will be purely the legislature that makes those decisions, which is going to be a much more political, much more partisan process that's happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've heard this a bit too, so it's good to hear what's actually happening with these funds and how they move through the project. Athena, since you're here, we have another question from the audience that might be good for you. Since you're on the LCCMR, how many projects typically apply for these funds in a year? And are there a lot that don't get funded? And then will the community grant program potentially change that?
Yeah, great question. So I couldn't tell you off the top of my head the total number of projects that apply. I know that it is in the hundreds, and that we narrow it down substantially to about 100. I want to say there was 92 last session that we went through. What I will say is that when we see this small grants project addition, what we're hoping to see is that some groups that would not normally apply to the LCCMR are going to apply for this funding because they are going to find the process a lot easier and get some additional help walking through the process. And so the idea is not that we will necessarily be funding projects that get rejected currently, but that we'll bring in a whole new set of projects and organizations that have not gotten to be a part of the LCCMR process. When I talk to folks who had smaller organizations that were doing really good work. They told me that the LCCMR process was overly burdensome for small organizations that just don't have like a dedicated person applying for grants. And so being able to do this small grant program, we're hoping is going to bring in some smaller organizations, newer organizations that still need some of these, that are still doing great work, especially in localized communities, and get them some of those dollars and hopefully help them to grow in prominence and resources so that they're then able to participate in the full LCCMR process in the future.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Marcus, I do have one for you now. So when trying to get people to vote yes on this, what are some of the top line points that we should touch on that would be most persuasive for folks who are maybe on the fence?
Sure. So the way we've been talking about this, and hence like the name is Minnesotans for our great outdoors. They're just like, I think those words, great outdoors, is just so synonymous with Minnesota. And we think about the things that what makes us a strong state, the things that we love about living here. It's our clean water, it's our lakes, it's our parks and trails, it's our beautiful habitat. And what this does is these funds, really take care of all that, and kind of just makes our state, gives us that competitive advantage for why we want to be here. So that's just one thing, and just kind of talking about just the things that we enjoy about being outdoors. I'd also say, this is a really bipartisan supported effort. Rep. Hollins mentioned, there was over 22 House Republican members who voted yes to get this on the ballot. In the past, over 70% of people have voted yes. And so that means that there's been 70% of people voting yes in the past. It is definitely something that kind of crosses the divide. There's a lot going on our ballot this year. It's nice to have a political conversation. That's easy. Then lastly, I would say we're just voting on continuing something that's already been there. This isn't new. And most importantly, it's not a tax increase. It's just using funds that are already going to be there. Like, we're not debating whether or not we're saying yes or no to a state lottery. That'd be a whole different pickle to be involved in. The lottery is here. We just want to make sure that the environment still gets a portion of that.
Very good points. Thank you, Marcus. Carolina, back to you. I'm just kind of curious, and we're going to maybe ask everyone this. Why are you personally planning to vote yes on this amendment, assuming that you will?
Yes, for me, it's very personal. So I have the enormous privilege and honor of engaging with community members on a day-to-day basis. We had one member of Copal who migrated from California to Minnesota because she said Minnesota is a safe haven. It's the place that she lost her home in California because of a forest fire. She was going through a very challenging time. She moved here, but then she moved here right at the time when we started seeing the effects of the Canadian fires. And she said, "Hey, this triggered so much trauma for me, and it reminded me that even though Minnesota is my safe haven, there's things out of our control, but also there's things in our control that we can do to preserve and protect our environment." And because she knows directly the impacts of losing everything, she wants to be a part of the work, and she wants to continue building and working on protecting our outdoors. So I think hearing stories like that, again, so often, so frequently, is a reminder to me, and it's a no-brainer that we should vote yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Marcus, same question for you. Why are you personally voting yes on this amendment?
Yeah, I think it's just a continuation, sort of what I mentioned earlier. Like, when we think about the things that we love about Minnesota, this is that. And it goes to kind of just protect things that we love about our state. I think everyone, and it's not even about, one thing that I think wasn't mentioned too much, there's a lot of programming that goes to like educational programs that will kind of take kids and send them to the boundary waters. So it's just one of those things that like we start at such a young age here of being outside and enjoying the environment, and then that goes throughout our entire lives. So just being able to kind of protect that and keep that going is something very important to us.
Thanks for sharing that. Then Representative Hollins, before you answer that personal question, I am just curious. So, being on the LCCMR and previously as the chief author of the reauthorization bill, what's something you would like folks here and all Minnesotans to know about these funds that maybe they don't know about?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I guess the number one thing that I want people to understand about these funds is that it's not a tax. So I've heard there's some confusion and people think that this is a tax question. It's not a tax question. The money is already there because of the lottery, right? And so we are not taxing Minnesotans to do this work. We are simply asking them to allocate the money, the proceeds from the lottery fund to go here instead of to the general fund. And so I think that that's really important for folks to understand, so that when they get there and they see that question on the ballot, recognize that this is not an additional tax. We're not trying to do anything. You're not trying to burden you any further. This is just reallocating the same amount of money.
Excellent. Well, we're approaching the end here, and just want to thank you all so much. This was excellent to learn a little bit more about what is actually on our ballot, what is actually going to happen when we pass this, and to hear your expertise and your take on all this has been just wonderful. So really value your time and your participation in this. Thank you so much. Any parting words before we move to Katie for closing statement here?
Vote yes.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Katie?
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. This was fantastic to hear, just great perspectives and information. Thank you, Representative Hollis. Thank you to Carolina Ortiz and to Marcus Starr for sharing all your expertise and perspective with us. And Avery, thank you for engaging and facilitating the discussion. I wanted to say that Conservation Minnesota encourages all of you to vote yes on the ballot question. I encourage you to do so as well. So you can vote either at the polls on November 5th or early voting in person or by mail. And please remember that leaving the question blank means a no vote in Minnesota. So mark that question yes. To learn more about the campaign and how you can help, you can visit mngreatoutdoors.org. We hope that you will continue to stay engaged with Conservation Minnesota and to stay tuned for more events like this coming soon. Thank you, everybody.